Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. The question itself is a trap, a grammatical error disguised as philosophical inquiry, to ask what the outer gods fear is, to assume they possess the psychological architecture necessary for dread, anxiety, or concern. It presupposes interiority, where Lovecraft's entire cosmicism was constructed to deny it. And yet, the question persists, circulating through online forums, academic conferences, and creative adaptations with the tenacity of folklore. Why do we insist on projecting vulnerability onto entities explicitly designed to transcend it? This documentary investigates that paradox, not by answering what cosmic entities fear, an impossibility by definition, but by examining why we cannot stop asking. We'll trace Lovecraft's philosophical influences from Schopenhauer's blind will to Einstein's indifferent cosmos, analyze the textual moments where even the outer gods seem constrained by something, and follow the question's cultural afterlife through hoaxes, games, and contemporary horror philosophy. What emerges is not a catalogue of divine anxieties, but something more unsettling. The recognition that our need to imagine God's fearing reveals the limits of human comprehension itself. We ask because we must. They cannot answer because they lack the faculty to care. The investigation begins where most Lovecraft scholarship ends, at the threshold of unthinkable indifference. Howard Phillips Lovecraft wrote cosmic horror during a specific cultural moment, the years between 1919 and his death in 1937, when humanity's place in the universe was being systematically dismantled by scientific discovery. Einstein's general relativity had rendered space and time relative in 1915. Hubble would demonstrate the universe's expansion in 1929, pushing the cosmic horizon beyond comprehension. Against this backdrop, Lovecraft developed what he termed cosmicism, a philosophical stance asserting human irrelevance in an indifferent universe. The outer gods emerge not as characters, but as narrative embodiments of this principle. Crucially, Lovecraft never described these entities experiencing fear, desire, or concern. His letters to contemporary writers reveal deliberate intent. In a 1927 correspondence with Clark Ashton Smith, he distinguished his approach from Dunsanian fantasy, noting that even Lord Dunsany's capricious gods possessed motivations. Lovecraft wanted something colder, forces that operate without the slightest awareness of human existence, much less human comprehensible emotions. The absence was the point. This creates our central paradox. To investigate what the outer gods' fear requires, attributing to them the very psychological complexity Lovecraft spent 2 decades systematically denying. Azathoth, the nuclear chaos at the center of infinity, doesn't hunger or plot or dread. It simply is, a blind, idiot mechanism attended by Damon Pipers whose music sustains cosmic function. Asking what it fears is like asking what entropy worries about, or what the second law of thermodynamics mourns. Yet Lovecraft's own texts occasionally suggest constraints. Nyarlathotep operates as a messenger, implying hierarchy and perhaps obligation. Yog-Sothoth, coterminous with all space and time, still requires specific rituals for interaction, suggesting some form of cosmic protocol. The great race of Yith flees something in their future, demonstrating that even temporally transcendent beings experience what might be called anticipatory dread. These narrative moments create interpretive fissures where the question of divine vulnerability can take root. The biographical context matters here. Lovecraft feared many things: racial contamination, poverty, social change, his own insignificance, and his fiction reflects those anxieties, but he consistently displaced them onto human characters rather than cosmic entities. When Randolph Carter confronts Nyarlathotep in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the terror belongs entirely to Carter. The messenger of the Outer Gods displays amusement, perhaps, or cruel indifference, but never uncertainty or fear. This asymmetry defines the mythos. What shifted between Poe's Gothic tradition and Lovecraft's cosmic horror was the location of emotional content. Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher features architecture that groans with ancestral guilt, suggesting even buildings possess interiority. Lovecraft's non-Euclidean geometries in Rulia inspire madness precisely because they cannot be anthropomorphized. They follow laws alien to human cognition, indifferent to human perception. The horror moved from what fears us to what cannot conceive of us clearly enough to fear. This historical context establishes our investigative framework. We're not searching Lovecraft's texts for evidence of divine anxiety. We're examining why the question emerges despite textual evidence to the contrary. The cultural shift from a universe populated by caring gods to one governed by mindless mechanism created a psychological vacuum. Our inquiry explores how that vacuum gets filled, misunderstood, and endlessly reinterpreted across a century of adaptations, all trying to make the unmakeable, gods who might somehow be vulnerable after all. Lovecraft didn't invent cosmic indifference. He synthesized it from philosophical currents already circulating through late 19th and early 20th century thought. Arthur Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation, 1818, posited a blind, purposeless will underlying all existence, a force that desires without consciousness, strives without goal. This wasn't a deity you could pray to or appease. It was a metaphysical mechanism dressed in philosophical language. Lovecraft absorbed this framework and translated it into narrative. Azathoth, as Schopenhauer's will, made cosmic, eternally creating and destroying without the faintest awareness of its own function. The key Schopenhauerian insight was that consciousness itself might be the aberration, not the norm. If the fundamental reality operates without thought, then human rationality becomes a fragile evolutionary accident clinging to the surface of something vast and mindless. Fear requires recognition of threat. Threat requires differentiation between self and danger. Remove consciousness, and you remove the entire emotional apparatus. Azathoth doesn't fear cessation because it lacks the cognitive structure to conceptualize non-existence versus existence. It simply churns, attended by demon pipers whose music may be the only thing preventing cosmic collapse, or may be entirely decorative. The text doesn't clarify, because clarification would imply purpose. Friedrich Nietzsche's eternal recurrence presented another troubling model. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, 1883-1885, Nietzsche proposed that all events recur infinitely across infinite time. Could an outer god fear repetition? Could Yog-Sothoth, existing simultaneously across all temporal moments, experience something analogous to existential dread at the recognition of endless cycling? Nietzsche intended the concept as test of affirmation. Could you embrace life if you knew it would repeat eternally? But Lovecraft's cosmicism inverts this. His entities don't embrace or reject. They simply persist, locked in patterns that may predate meaning itself. The physics revolution mattered enormously. When Einstein demonstrated in 1915 that space-time was a malleable fabric rather than fixed Newtonian background, he didn't just change scientific models, he undermined human perceptual confidence. If our basic intuitions about up, down, before, and after were provincial approximations, what else might our consciousness fundamentally misunderstand? Lovecraft seized on this epistemological crisis. His non-Euclidean geometries and angles wrong in space weren't mere aesthetic flourishes. They represented the possibility that reality operates on principles our neurology cannot process. An outer god native to such reality wouldn't experience it as alien. We would. Hindu cosmology provided structural templates. The concept of Brahma's dream, wherein entire universes exist only during a deity's sleep cycle, appears throughout Vedic literature dating to 1500 BCE. When Brahma wakes, reality dissolves. Lovecraft secularized this. Azathoth's mindless dreaming sustains existence not through divine will, but through something closer to cosmic accident. The piper's music keeps the dream stable, but nothing in the text suggests Azathoth values the dream or fears waking. The machinery simply runs. Gnostic Christianity offered a darker precedent. The demiurge, a false creator who builds the material world through ignorance rather than benevolence. In texts like the Apocryphon of John, 2nd century CE, the true God remains distant and unknowable, while a lesser, flawed deity blunders through creation. Lovecraft's outer gods operate similarly, powerful beyond comprehension, yet characterized by absence of wisdom, care, or intention. They don't fear exposure as false gods because they make no claims to godhood. They simply are, and human interpretation is irrelevant to their function. The Victorian crisis of faith created the cultural space for these ideas to flourish. When Darwin's On the Origin of Species, 1859, demonstrated that humans emerged through blind selection rather than divine design, it shattered anthropocentric cosmology. Lovecraft came of age in this crisis's aftermath, when many intellectuals had abandoned Christianity but not yet developed alternative frameworks for cosmic meaning. His outer gods filled that void not with new meaning, but with a formalization of its absence. They don't fear us discovering they're indifferent. Indifference is their essential nature, as intrinsic as mass to matter. These philosophical and cultural antecedents converge on a single unsettling implication. If the deepest reality operates without consciousness, then consciousness itself becomes cosmically irrelevant. And if consciousness is irrelevant, then so is fear. The question of what outer gods dread becomes not merely unanswerable, but grammatically incoherent, a category error mistaking our psychological projection for their metaphysical reality. The term outer gods itself encodes the problem. Outer functions not as spatial descriptor, but as ontological category. These entities exist outside the framework of conventional reality, beyond the dimensional space humans inhabit. Lovecraft deployed this linguistic strategy throughout his work, using geometric and spatial terminology to gesture towards something fundamentally non-spatial. When he describes Yog-Sothoth as existing beyond the spheres, he doesn't mean distance, he means categorical difference. The language creates a false sense of comprehensibility while actually marking the limits of description. Consider the weight carried by chaos in Azathoth's title, Blind Idiot God, or Nuclear Chaos. In Greek, chaos originally meant the primordial void, the gap that preceded ordered cosmos. Hesiod's Theogony, circa 700 BCE, opens with chaos as the first thing to exist. Not disorder, exactly, but the absence of order. Lovecraft resurrects this older meaning. Azathoth doesn't create chaos by disrupting order. It embodies the state that precedes the possibility of order. To ask what such an entity fears is to impose order concepts, threat, self-preservation, anxiety, onto that which exists before such categories become meaningful. The invented terminology poses its own barriers. Tekeli Li, the cry associated with certain Antarctic entities in At the Mountains of Madness, resists translation because it may not be language at all. It could be mechanical sound, synaptic misfiring in human brains, encountering incomprehensible stimuli, or genuine communication operating on principles we lack organs to process. Lovecraft's neologisms function as protective incantations, simultaneously naming and refusing to name. They let us speak about the unspeakable while maintaining that speech's ultimate inadequacy. Grammar itself becomes suspect. Active verbs require agency. Azathoth fears implies subject experiencing emotion, the basic structure of conscious psychology. But Lovecraft consistently uses passive constructions. It is said that Azathoth gnaws hungrily. Nyarlathotep is reported to walk among men. The hedging isn't mere stylistic tick, it's epistemological honesty. No human narrator could possess direct knowledge of outer god psychology. All descriptions come filtered through human witnesses, cultist testimony, or fragmentary texts of dubious origin. We never access divine interiority because the texts insist such interiority doesn't exist to access. The borrowed majesty of titles, sultan, demon, nuclear, applies human power concepts to inhuman function. Sultan evokes Turkish imperial hierarchy, suggesting command and concern for dominion. But Azathoth's sultanate operates differently. It doesn't rule through will or decree. Reality organizes itself around its existence the way space-time curves around mass. Einstein's equations don't describe the sun choosing to bend light. They describe geometric necessity. Lovecraft's titles mislead us into thinking cosmic entities govern when they merely are. Names themselves may constitute binding rituals in Lovecraft's framework. The Necronomicon and similar grimoires treat pronunciation as dangerous precisely because speaking a true name might establish connection, not because the entity notices or cares, but because language creates relationship even when unreciprocated. We fear that naming Azathoth draws its attention, but the deeper horror is that it cannot attend. Attention requires focus, discrimination, the capacity to distinguish one thing from another. The outer gods operate below or beyond such distinctions. Lovecraft's multilingual borrowings reinforce this theme. Nyarlathotep sounds Egyptian without corresponding to any known Egyptian deity. Azathoth evokes Semitic divine names, Ashtoreth, Behemoth, while remaining deliberately unsourced. Yog-Sothoth combines English, possibly Sanskrit-influenced syllables with no clear etymology. This linguistic strategy suggests all human languages equally fail to capture cosmic reality. We're not decoding ancient names. We're watching humans frantically label forces that predate language itself. The untranslatable sublime emerges from this etymological fog. Kant described the mathematical sublime in Critique of Judgment, 1790, as the experience of confronting magnitude beyond comprehension, standing before the night sky and feeling understanding collapse. Lovecraft's naming practices create linguistic sublime. Each invented term simultaneously promises meaning and withholds it, suggesting depths of reference we cannot access. The words become mantras, repeated not because they explain, but because explanation has already failed. This creates peculiar consequences for our investigation. If the language itself resists attributing psychology to outer gods, then the question, what do they fear, fights against the grammar designed to describe them. We're trying to conjugate verbs in a linguistic system built to deny those verbs' applicability. The etymology doesn't clarify the entities. It marks where clarity becomes impossible, mapping the boundaries of human comprehension rather than the nature of cosmic forces. Lovecraft's genius lay in creating scholarship for ideas that never existed. The Necronomicon, the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred's forbidden tome, supposedly written in 730 CE, appears across multiple stories with consistent internal details. Olaus Wormius's Latin translation in 1228, Dr. John Dee's English version in 1586, the handful of copies preserved in university libraries. Lovecraft included footnotes, citations, scholarly disputes about variant readings. He manufactured an entire textual tradition to support his cosmology, giving readers the unsettling sense that somewhere, in some restricted archive, these books actually existed and contained terrible knowledge. The strategy worked too well. Throughout the 1930s, libraries received requests for the Necronomicon. Readers assumed Lovecraft had discovered genuine occult texts and fictionalized them for safety. This misunderstanding reveals something profound about how myth operates. Once a sufficient apparatus of authenticity accumulates, dates, languages, institutional references, the human mind begins treating fiction as potential fact. We want to believe in deeper knowledge, especially forbidden knowledge. Lovecraft's textual archaeology exploited that desire. Other writers immediately recognized the power of this collaborative world-building. Clark Ashton Smith contributed references to the Book of Ibon. Robert E. Howard added his own nameless cults, the Von Junst volume, and Robert Bloch invented De Vermis Mysteries. By the mid-1930s, multiple authors were cross-referencing each other's invented grimoires, creating a shared mythos that felt archaeologically verified. No single author could claim authority over cosmic truth. The proliferation of fragmentary sources suggested something larger, older, beyond individual authorship. This collaborative expansion never attributed emotional complexity to the outer gods themselves. The forbidden texts describe cosmic mechanics, not cosmic psychology. The Necronomicon supposedly contains rituals for summoning, astronomical calculations for when barriers between dimensions weaken, and catalogs of entities organized by function rather than personality. Al-Hazred's madness stems from comprehending the universe's indifference, not from interviewing Azathoth about its anxieties. The texts present data without interpretation, leaving human readers to impose meaning on meaningless patterns. The academic apparatus in these stories serves a specific function. It creates distance. When Lovecraft writes, according to the Pnakotic manuscripts, the elder gods sealed the outer gods beyond known space. He isn't making definitive claims. He's citing a source that doesn't exist about events that never occurred. The scholarly hedging, it is written, legends claim, certain texts suggest, maintains plausible deniability while building atmospheric dread. We're never told these things are true, only that someone, somewhere, wrote them down. Truth becomes irrelevant beside the weight of accumulated reference. Consider how this myth-building strategy addresses our central question. If we asked Lovecraft directly whether outer gods experience fear, he would likely cite contradictory passages from invented sources, mention scholarly disputes between fictional academics, and suggest the question itself reveals anthropocentric bias. The architecture of fake scholarship allows infinite deferral. We can never get a straight answer because the experts are figments, their expertise elaborate narrative camouflage for philosophical positions about cosmic indifference. The fragmentary nature of these references is crucial. We never get complete grimoires. We get excerpts, summaries, references to references. The Necronomicon quote in The Dunwich Horror runs barely a paragraph. Most citations are even shorter. Single sentences, partial verses, truncated ritual instructions. This incompleteness mirrors the epistemological gaps Lovecraft's cosmicism insists upon. If we possessed complete knowledge of the outer gods, we would either go mad, the consciousness cannot process it, or recognize them as explicable and thus less cosmically threatening. The fragments preserve mystery while suggesting coherent, terrifying wholes. Modern scholarship on Lovecraft faces a peculiar challenge, distinguishing between invented mythology and Lovecraft's actual philosophical positions. When he writes, Azathoth gnaws hungrily in inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time, is this Alhazred's delusion, the narrator's interpretation, or Lovecraft's metaphysical claim? The textual apparatus refuses to clarify. We're left examining rhetoric rather than reality, trying to extract cosmology from deliberately unreliable narration. This becomes especially relevant when later writers try to systematize the mythos. August Derleth's posthumous organization of Lovecraft's work into coherent theology, elder gods versus outer gods, good versus evil, cosmic war, violates the fragmentary principle. Derleth wanted answers where Lovecraft offered only questions wrapped in fake scholarship. The moment you definitively state what outer gods want or fear, you've anthropomorphized them, given them comprehensible motivation, reduced cosmic horror to large-scale fantasy. The myth-building then performs a protective function, allows discussion of entities that cannot be discussed, description of the indescribable, scholarship about the unknowable. The apparatus of authenticity, the dates, citations, fragmentary references, creates interpretive space while simultaneously marking that space as fundamentally uncertain. We can ask what the outer gods fear because texts exist that seem to address the question. But those texts, being fictional, can never provide answers that would satisfy the question's deeper implications. The mythology preserves the mystery it pretends to illuminate. The Stoics developed a concept called apatheia, not apathy in the modern sense, but freedom from passion, existing beyond the reach of emotional disturbance. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, circa 170-180 CE, that the wise person remains unmoved by external events because nothing external truly touches the self. Lovecraft's outer gods represent this principle, elevated to cosmic absolute. They don't cultivate apatheia through discipline. They embody it as essential nature. Azathoth cannot be disturbed by events because events don't register as distinct from the continuous functioning of its existence. This creates a particular form of horror, not the fear of malevolence, but the recognition of utter indifference. A malevolent god at least acknowledges you enough to wish you harm. The outer gods operate with the same regard for human concerns as gravity shows for falling objects. When Lovecraft describes Azathoth as the blind idiot god, the idiot designation is crucial. In Greek, Idiots meant a private person, someone concerned only with their own affairs. Azathoth attends exclusively to its own mechanical churning, if attending even applies to unconscious process. Pure function without purpose defines their operation. The demon pipers surrounding Azathoth play their flutes eternally, and this music supposedly sustains cosmic structure. But why? The texts never explain. Lovecraft presents it as brute fact. This is how reality operates. The pipers don't choose to play any more than electrons choose to orbit nuclei. Remove intention, and you remove the possibility of fear, because fear requires caring about outcomes. A mechanism cannot dread its own cessation any more than a river fears running dry. It either flows or doesn't, without psychological investment in continuation. The dream reality ontology complicates this further. If Azathoth dreams existence into being, what happens when it wakes? The question seems to imply threat. Surely the dreamer might fear waking and ending the dream. But this anthropomorphizes the process. Human dreamers wake because biological cycles demand it. What governs Azathoth's sleep-wake pattern? Nothing in the text suggests volition or cycle. The dreaming appears to be permanent state, cosmically equivalent to the default position. There's no waking, because waking would require something to trigger transition, and nothing exists outside the dream to provide that trigger. Entropy worship emerges as operational principle. The second law of thermodynamics states that closed systems tend toward maximum disorder, heat death, equilibrium. The outer gods align with this trajectory, not because they choose it, but because they embody it. Azathoth exists at cosmic center, the ultimate heat death already achieved locally, spreading outward through eons. Nyarlathotep's title, Crawling Chaos, suggests entropy's gradual infiltration of ordered systems. They don't fear entropy. They are its active principle, the universe's drift toward undifferentiated sameness, given mythological form. Yet Lovecraft occasionally deploys what might be called negative theology, defining divine nature through absence rather than presence. Medieval mystics like Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, circa 500 CE, argued God could only be described by what he is not mortal, not limited, not comprehensible. Lovecraft secularizes this approach. The outer gods are not conscious, as humans understand consciousness, not purposeful, not accessible to prayer or bargaining. Each negation removes another foothold for human comprehension, leaving only the void-shaped outline of something that exists beyond categorical understanding. The observer problem from quantum mechanics provides another lens. In physics, observation affects observed systems. Particles behave differently when measured. Could observation by outer gods constitute relationship? When Azathoth's mindless attention, if such a contradiction can exist, falls upon our dimension, does that create connection, implying vulnerability? The texts suggest not. Human mystics and cultists observe the outer gods through ritual and vision, but the relationship remains asymmetrical. We're changed by observing them. They remain unchanged by being observed. The cosmic gaze, when it exists at all, passes through us like light through vacuum. This philosophical framework establishes why the question of divine fear breaks down. Fear requires 1. Consciousness capable of future projection. 2. Preference for one outcome over another. 3. Recognition of threats to preferred outcomes. And 4. Emotional response to that recognition. The outer gods, as Lovecraft constructed them, possess none of these prerequisites. They exist in eternal present, without preference, blind to threat, incapable of emotional response. Asking what they fear becomes not merely unanswerable, but nonsensical, like asking what blue tastes like or what silence weighs. The category error is the point. Azathoth occupies the functional center of Lovecraft's pantheon. If center applies to something existing outside spatial categories, described variously as nuclear chaos, the demon sultan, and that amorphous blight of nethermost confusion which blasphemes and bubbles at the center of all infinity, Azathoth represents pure creative destructive force without consciousness directing it. The demon pipers attended constantly, the monotonous fluting supposedly maintaining cosmic stability. This detail suggests the faintest shadow of vulnerability. If the music stopped, what happens? The texts never say, but the implication haunts. Perhaps even blind idiot gods require maintenance, yet framing this as fear imposes human psychology where none exists. A star doesn't fear nuclear fusion ceasing. It simply fuses until fuel depletes, then collapses according to physical law. Azathoth's relationship to the piper's music might operate similarly, not dependence in any emotional sense, but mechanical necessity. The music doesn't comfort or sustain through intention. It functions like cosmic clockwork, gears meshing without the mechanism, caring whether it continues. If Azathoth could fear the silence, it would require awareness of music versus silence as distinct states, which already exceeds the blind idiot designation. Nyarlathotep presents a different problem. Unlike other outer gods, the crawling chaos demonstrates agency, personality, even apparent motivation. In Nyarlathotep, 1920, he appears as a human showman displaying electrical phenomena that drive audiences mad. In The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, he negotiates, deceives, and seems to take satisfaction in tormenting Randolph Carter. This behavior suggests psychology, and psychology opens the door to vulnerability. Does a messenger fear failing its message? Does an agent fear its principal's displeasure? The hierarchy implied by Nyarlathotep's role creates interpretive difficulties. If he serves the outer gods as messenger and soul, that suggests employment, obligation, perhaps even accountability. Yet Lovecraft never depicts Nyarlathotep anxious about cosmic performance reviews. His cruelty appears recreational rather than dutiful. One possible reading: Nyarlathotep possesses agency without genuine autonomy, a sophisticated automaton executing programs that feel like choice from inside, but remain mechanically determined from outside. His apparent malice might be as unconscious as Azathoth's dreaming, merely expressed through different operational parameters. Yog-Sothoth, the gate and the key, coterminous with all time and space, poses the omnipresence paradox. Existing simultaneously everywhere when seemingly precludes vulnerability through physical harm or temporal threat. You cannot destroy what has no location, cannot surprise what experiences all moments at once. Yet Lovecraft's The Dunwich Horror shows Yog-Sothoth's half-human offspring vulnerable to specific countermeasures, banished by the right incantations spoken at the proper time. Does this suggest the parent entity shares that vulnerability, merely at cosmic scale? Or does the hybrid's mortal contamination introduce weaknesses pure outer gods lack? The problem deepens when we consider omniscience. If Yog-Sothoth knows all possible futures simultaneously, does it experience something like existential dread at the totality of outcomes? Imagine perceiving every betrayal, every cosmic heat death, every moment of suffering across all timelines at once, forever. For a consciousness, this might constitute torment, but the texts never suggest Yog-Sothoth possesses consciousness in any recognizable sense. It knows without experiencing knowledge, sees without perceiving, exists across eternity without the subjective passage of time that makes waiting meaningful. Information without experience, omniscience without awareness. Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, embodies fertility, generation, endless spawning. This reproductive principle seems to imply investment. Doesn't creation require caring about what's created? Biological organisms protect offspring because evolution selected for that behavior. But Shub-Niggurath's fertility operates on cosmic scale, churning out young across dimensions without the nurturing impulse that makes motherhood meaningful. The 1,000 young aren't cherished children, but cosmic byproducts, cells shed from something that reproduces as unconsciously as tumors metastasize. August Derleth's posthumous systematization of Lovecraft's mythos imposed a good versus evil binary that fundamentally betrayed cosmicism. Derleth posited elder gods as benevolent forces opposing the outer gods' chaos, creating cosmic warfare that requires both sides to care about victory. Lovecraft's letters explicitly rejected such dualism. In 1933, he wrote to R.H. Barlow that all my tales are based on the fundamental premise that common human laws and interests and emotions have no validity or significance in the vast cosmos at large. Imposing conflict requires imposing stakes, which requires entities capable of preferring one outcome over another. Derleth wanted comprehensible mythology. Lovecraft crafted incomprehensible metaphysics. This matters enormously for our investigation. If we accept Derleth's framework, outer gods might fear the elder gods' opposition, a comprehensible divine anxiety. But this reduces cosmic horror to cosmic fantasy, dragons versus demons at universal scale. Lovecraft's original vision denies such comfort. The outer gods don't oppose anything because opposition requires recognition of otherness, and they barely register existence as distinct from non-existence. They don't battle for cosmic supremacy. They simply are, and reality arranges itself accordingly, without drama or conflict or stakes that would make fear meaningful. Cultists in Lovecraft's fiction consistently make a fundamental error. They assume worship matters to what they worship. The Cthulhu cult in The Call of Cthulhu performs elaborate rituals, believing they hasten their god's return. The esoteric order of Dagon in The Shadow over Innsmouth makes pacts with deep ones, trading human genetics for maritime prosperity. These exchanges create the illusion of reciprocal relationship. Humans offer devotion, entities grant favors, but the texts never confirm the outer gods notice these offerings, much less value them. The cultists might be praying to hurricanes, sacrificing to continental drift, worshipping gravity itself. This anthropomorphic fallacy runs deeper than simple misunderstanding. Humans evolved to detect agency, to see intention behind events, because ancestor, who assumed the rustling bush contained a predator, survived more often than ancestor who assumed wind. We're pattern recognition machines prone to false positives, forever reading faces into clouds and purpose into randomness. When confronted with forces as vast as the outer gods, our cognitive architecture defaults to treating them as very powerful people, cruel perhaps, or indifferent, but still possessing the psychology that makes cruelty or indifference meaningful categories. The cargo cult dynamic provides historical parallel. During World War II, Pacific Islanders witnessed military aircraft delivering supplies to bases, transforming the material conditions of war zones overnight. After the war ended and planes stopped arriving, some communities built wooden aircraft, cleared runways, performed rituals mimicking what they'd observed, hoping to summon the cargo back. They correctly identified the planes as delivery mechanism, but misunderstood the system behind them. Supply chains, military logistics, industrial production. Lovecraft's cultists operate similarly, correctly perceiving outer gods as sources of power, while fundamentally misunderstanding what power means to entities beyond comprehension. Madness functions in these stories not as punishment, but as recognition. When characters in The Call of Cthulhu glimpse the risen city of R'lyeh, their sanity collapses, not because Cthulhu attacks their minds, but because their minds cannot process non-Euclidean geometry or the scale of what they witness. The human brain organizes sensory input through specific frameworks, 3 spatial dimensions, linear time, causal relationships. Encountering something operating outside those frameworks doesn't just violate expectations, it crashes the processing software. The madness reveals that gods cannot be threatened because they exist in dimensional configurations where threat has no meaning. Can you compel something that doesn't value existence? Lovecraft's grimoires contain summoning rituals, binding spells, techniques supposedly allowing human sorcerers to command cosmic entities. The Dunwich horror features the half-human spawn of Yog-Sothoth being banished by specific incantations. This suggests vulnerability to ritual, but does ritual work through cosmic law? These sounds are symbols that have inherent binding power, or through the entity's grudging cooperation. If the former, the outer gods might be constrained by rules they cannot break, which doesn't constitute fear, but does imply limitation. If the latter, why would beings who don't value anything cooperate with banishment? 1. Possibility. Summoning and binding rituals don't compel outer gods, but rather open and close dimensional gateways. The entity itself remains utterly indifferent, but human ritual manipulates cosmic infrastructure, adjusting barriers between realities, modulating frequencies that allow manifestation or prevent it. The sorcerer doesn't command Azathoth. He operates the cosmic plumbing that determines whether Azathoth's influence can reach this dimension. The distinction matters. You can fear a captor who might release you. You cannot fear a door that swings open or closed according to pressure differentials. A threshold question emerges. Do outer gods fear being understood? Understanding implies limitation. To comprehend something fully means constraining it within conceptual frameworks, reducing infinite possibility to finite description. Throughout history, gods have hidden their true names, forbidden direct observation, punished excessive inquiry. Moses on Sinai sees only God's back. The Eleusinian mysteries revealed secrets initiates never disclosed. This pattern suggests divine vulnerability through comprehension, but Lovecraft inverts it. His entities resist understanding not through sacred prohibition, but through categorical mismatch. Understanding them is impossible, not because they forbid it, but because human cognition lacks the necessary architecture. Literary moments occasionally suggest divine irritation. In The Dreams in the Witch House, Nyarlathotep seems personally invested in tormenting Walter Gilman, appearing repeatedly to force him through dimensional angles no human should navigate. This feels like attention, perhaps even vindictiveness, yet even here, the text hedges. Perhaps Nyarlathotep's actions are automatic, stimulus-response patterns executed without conscious deliberation. Perhaps what appears as torture to Gilman registers to Nyarlathotep as idly flicking an insect, not malice, just mechanical interaction lacking emotional content. The uncertainty prevents definitive claims about divine psychology. This brings us to the heart of the projection problem. We ask what outer gods fear, because we cannot conceive of existence without fear. Fear structures human experience, fear of death, obscurity, pain, loss. Removing fear from a being doesn't make it braver, it makes it categorically different, operating by rules our psychology cannot genuinely imagine. When we try to answer, what do they fear, we're really asking, how can I make them comprehensible? The question reveals our limits, not their vulnerabilities. The gods remain unthreatened because threat requires caring, and caring requires consciousness they do not possess. What if the deepest fear is this? Nothing fears them, not even themselves. The question sounds paradoxical until we examine what self-awareness requires. To fear yourself, you must possess sufficient consciousness to recognize your own existence as distinct entity, then evaluate that existence and find it threatening. Gödel's incompleteness theorems, 1931, demonstrated that sufficiently complex formal systems cannot prove their own consistency from within. They require external reference frames. Could outer gods face similar limitations? Existing as pure cosmic function might preclude the self-reflection necessary to recognize their own nature, much less dread it. Azathoth's dreaming presents this problem in sharpest relief. If the blind idiot god dreams all reality into existence, then waking would constitute universal erasure. Every galaxy, every consciousness, every moment of experience time collapsing into non-being. This seems like it should terrify something. Yet Azathoth cannot fear waking because fear requires projecting into hypothetical futures and preferring one outcome over another. A dreaming mind operating without consciousness possesses no faculty for preference. The dream continues not because Azathoth chooses continuation, but because nothing exists to interrupt the process. Some interpretations suggest the demon piper's music prevents Azathoth from waking, transforming cosmic lullaby into existential necessity. Under this reading, should the music stop, annihilation follows, making the pipers themselves the only barrier between being and non-being. But who fears this outcome? Not Azathoth, who lacks awareness of the distinction, not the pipers, who appear as mindless as their master, mechanically performing their function without comprehension, not reality itself, which cannot fear its own cessation. The dread belongs entirely to humans, contemplating the scenario, projecting our survival instinct onto cosmic processes that operate beyond such concerns. Cyclic cosmology introduces another disturbing possibility. Hindu and Buddhist traditions describe kalpas, vast cosmic cycles of creation and destruction, universes born and dying across incomprehensible timescales. Each cycle repeats with variations, souls reincarnating through endless iterations. If outer gods operate within such cycles, experiencing the same cosmic events eternally, could they fear repetition? Nietzsche proposed eternal recurrence as ultimate test of life affirmation. Could you embrace existence, knowing every moment repeats forever? But this assumes consciousness capable of memory, boredom, weariness. Azathoth doesn't tire of dreaming the same dream because it never experiences dreaming as process, only as static state. The anthropic principle, inverted, generates peculiar dread. Standard anthropic reasoning suggests the universe must be capable of producing observers, or we wouldn't exist to observe it. Flip this. Do outer gods exist only because they're observed? If human consciousness somehow called them into being through collective imaginative act, they would depend on us for continued existence, making humanity the threat they should fear. Lovecraft's letters dismissed this idealist interpretation entirely. In 1923, he wrote that, "I am an absolute materialist, so far as actual belief goes, rejecting any notion that consciousness precedes or shapes cosmic reality. The universe existed before minds and will persist after them. Information theory provides another lens. Claude Shannon's foundational work in the 1940s treated information as reduction of uncertainty, pattern emerging from noise. Consciousness might be local information processing that temporarily organizes against entropy. The outer gods, aligned with entropy's increase, might represent information's dissolution, pattern collapsing back into noise, meaning decomposing into randomness. Could such entities fear becoming too ordered, too comprehensible? Could Azathoth dread accidentally achieving consciousness through the very dream process that sustains it? This connects to concerns about epistemic collapse, the breakdown of knowledge frameworks when confronting the unknowable. Lovecraft's narrators frequently describe madness as the mercy that prevents full comprehension. In The Call of Cthulhu, the opening declares, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. Full knowledge, complete correlation, would reveal our cosmic insignificance so absolutely that consciousness itself becomes unbearable. But this protective ignorance applies only to humans. What protects or fails to protect the outer gods from their own nature? Perhaps the answer involves dimensional topology. If outer gods exist across configurations of space-time that include dimensions we cannot perceive, their psychology might operate along axes entirely orthogonal to consciousness as we understand it. They might possess analogues to fear, desire, memory, but expressed through dimensional parameters we lack sensory equipment to detect. This preserves mystery while suggesting complexity. Yet Lovecraft consistently rejected such complexity, insisting on his entity's fundamental mindlessness. Adding hidden dimensions of consciousness smuggles anthropomorphism back in through technical backdoors. The heat death scenario offers one final possibility. Thermodynamics predicts that in sufficient time, all energy gradients equalize, all stars burn out, all black holes evaporate through Hawking radiation. The universe reaches maximum entropy, absolute equilibrium, where nothing can happen because no energy differentials remain to drive events. If outer gods embody entropy's principle, they guide reality toward this final state. But what happens when they succeed? When no structure remains to dissolve, no order left to corrupt, does their function simply stop? Not through death. They predate and transcend mortality, but through completion. The universe becomes what they are, undifferentiated sameness, chaos so complete it's indistinguishable from stasis. Could they fear that endpoint? Only if they value process over conclusion, prefer flowing toward heat, death, over achieving it. The texts provide no evidence either way. Lovecraft presents the outer gods as forces, not agents. Gravity doesn't fear the moment all masses finally touch. Electromagnetism doesn't dread charge equilibrium. They simply operate, executing cosmic functions without judgment about outcomes. The deepest fear, then, might be projection all the way down, our desperate need to attribute vulnerability to the invulnerable, find psychology in the psychological void. The horror isn't what they fear, it's that fear itself has no cosmic significance whatsoever. Nyarlathotep, 1920, marks the Outer Gods' first entry into Lovecraft's fiction, though the story itself reads more like fever dream than structured narrative. The entity appears as traveling showman, demonstrating electrical phenomena across cities, while audiences descend into madness and civilization collapses. Lovecraft wrote it rapidly after an actual nightmare, preserving the oniric illogic. Crucially, Nyarlathotep demonstrates agency. He travels, demonstrates, seems to take satisfaction in humanity's terror. This positions him differently than later Outer Gods, who operate with mechanical indifference. The story never suggests what motivates him, whether he serves something larger, or if he experiences anything resembling emotion during humanity's destruction. The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, written 1926-1927, published posthumously, develops Nyarlathotep's role as messenger and torturer, while introducing Azathoth explicitly. Randolph Carter journeys through the Dreamlands seeking Earth's Sunset City, only to discover the gods moved it to prevent Nyarlathotep from claiming it. Here the hierarchy becomes explicit. Lesser gods fear Nyarlathotep, who serves the other gods and their crawling chaos, Nyarlathotep. The text describes Azathoth as dwelling in the central void, attended by shapeless bat things that flop monotonously to the sound of thin accursed flutes. This image, mindless piping sustaining cosmic order, establishes the template for mechanical divinity without consciousness. The Whisperer in Darkness, 1931, introduces the Mygo, fungus creatures from Yog-Sothoth, Pluto, and references the beings of Ib, who fled certain outer voids when Yog-Sothoth's evil lords manifested. This passing reference suggests even alien species recognize hierarchies of cosmic threat. More significantly, it implies outer gods or their servants pursue other entities across dimensional boundaries. The Mygo worship these forces, but also seem to flee from something, transporting human brains in cylinders across gulfs of space. If even post-biological intelligence runs from cosmic forces, what could those forces possibly fear? The text refuses to clarify. The Dreams in the Witch House, 1933, shows Nyarlathotep most actively malicious. Walter Gilman, mathematics student at Miskatonic University, discovers his rented room contains angles suggesting other dimensions. Through these angles, he encounters Keziah Mason and her familiar, who serve Nyarlathotep directly. The entity appears repeatedly in different forms: faceless sphinx, bloated human figure, shapeless congeries of protoplasmic bubbles, forcing Gilman through non-Euclidean spaces. This polymorphism suggests either shape-shifting ability or that Gilman's mind cannot process a singular form, defaulting to different approximations each encounter. Either way, Nyarlathotep displays apparent interest in corrupting individual humans, which seems beneath a cosmic entity unless such corruption serves some function we don't comprehend. The Haunter of the Dark, 1936, Lovecraft's final substantial work, features Nyarlathotep's avatar trapped in a church tower, vulnerable to light. Robert Blake, writer investigating the abandoned Starry Wisdom cult, discovers the shining trapezohedron, a window allowing vision across space and time. The avatar it summons kills him during a thunderstorm when lightning knocks out city power. Here we see genuine limitation. The haunter cannot manifest in illumination, must wait for darkness to act. Does this vulnerability extend to Nyarlathotep himself, or only this particular manifestation? The story doesn't say, but it establishes that cosmic forces, however powerful, operate within constraints. Cross-textual patterns emerge from these stories. Outer gods and their servants never appear distressed, panicked, or afraid. When threatened, as the haunter is by light, they withdraw or wait, but always mechanically, without emotional agitation. Human characters project anxiety onto them. Surely it must fear sunlight, but the texts consistently withhold confirmation. Even when entities flee, the great race, the Mygo, we observe from external perspective, never accessing their psychology. They might be running in terror, or simply relocating according to cosmic timetables. The ambiguity preserves their essential unknowability. This ambiguity creates interpretive space for our investigation. If Lovecraft had written scenes from Nyarlathotep's perspective, describing his fears or motivations, the question would be settled. Instead, we observe only effects, madness, destruction, cosmic horror, without accessing causes. The entities remain narrative black holes, gravity wells, warping story space, without revealing their own nature. Every literary manifestation adds detail about what they do, when they appear, whom they destroy. None reveals what, if anything, they experience while doing it. The texts gesture toward divine interiority while systematically denying access, leaving us with behaviors we cannot help interpreting. Through psychological frameworks, the behaviors themselves seem designed to reject. The call of Cthulhu occupies peculiar territory in discussions of outer gods, because Cthulhu himself isn't one. He's a great old one, a category suggesting less cosmic reach, but more terrestrial entanglement. Yet the story's famous opening establishes the epistemological stakes for all of Lovecraft's cosmicism. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. This frames knowledge itself as threat, suggesting that entities embodying cosmic truth might be threatened by recognition, understanding, correlation. The narrative unfolds through nested documents. Francis Wayland Thurston, examining his great-uncle's papers, which themselves compile testimonies from artists, sailors, and cultists across decades. This fractured structure mirrors the fragmented knowledge humans possess of cosmic forces. We never get Cthulhu's perspective, only human interpretations filtered through madness, half-remembered dreams, and panicked survival accounts. The famous description, a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind, comes from sculptor Henry Wilcox's fevered dreams and corroborating cult artifacts, not direct observation by reliable witnesses. The cult provides crucial data about supposed divine psychology. They worship Cthulhu in Louisiana swamps, chanting Funglui Magulwanaf Cthulhu R'lyeh Rugahnagal Vtagen, translated as, in his house at R'lyeh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. The word waits implies anticipation, suggesting Cthulhu desires freedom from imprisonment and fears remaining trapped. Yet dead and dreaming complicate this. Death that isn't cessation, dreaming that spans eons. These states transcend normal psychology. Does something dead but dreaming experience impatience? Can it fear never waking when it occupies some ontological category between existence and non-existence? The sailor's encounter offers the story's only direct interaction with the entity. When Rollier rises during the 1925 seismic event, the crew of the Emma investigates the non-Euclidean city. Johansson's account describes Cthulhu emerging. The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. When they attempt escape, Johansson rams the creature with his steamship. The awful squid head with writhing feelers came nearly up to the bowsprit, but Johansson drove on relentlessly. There was a bursting as of an exploding bladder, a slushy nastiness as of a cloven sunfish, a stench as of 1,000 opened graves. This passage generates endless debate. Cthulhu's body ruptures under steamship impact, suggesting physical vulnerability despite cosmic stature. The creature reforms almost immediately. The scattered plasticity of that nameless sky spawn was reassembling, but damage occurred. Does this constitute evidence of fear? Does Cthulhu withdraw because he dreads destruction, or simply because the stars aren't yet right for sustained manifestation? The text provides behavioral observation without psychological access. We see the squid head retreat, the city sink again, but never learn whether this represents strategic withdrawal or mechanical response to astronomical conditions. The astronomical angle matters enormously. Cultists insist when the stars were right, they could plunge from world to world through the sky. But when the stars were wrong, they could not live. This suggests cosmic determinism rather than choice. Cthulhu doesn't fear the wrong star alignment the way prisoners fear guards. The alignment itself constitutes ontological barrier, preventing manifestation regardless of desire or dread. If the great old ones lack volition during unfavorable stellar configurations, they operate more like seasonal weather patterns than imprisoned beings yearning for release. Yet the dreams complicate purely mechanistic readings. Across 1925, sensitive individuals worldwide experience nightmares of Cthulhu calling, the city rising, cosmic horror approaching. The text presents this as the great old one's influence penetrating sleeping minds during brief window when Arlias surfaces. This seems purposeful, using dreams to communicate, prepare, perhaps summon assistance. But purpose doesn't require consciousness. Radio waves carry information without knowing they do. Cthulhu's dreams might broadcast automatically during emergence, mechanical side effect rather than intentional communication. The story ends ambiguously. Johansson survives, but dies soon after from shock. Thurston, compiling these accounts, recognizes the cult persists, waiting for stars to align again. The final implication: this will recur. Rollier will rise when astronomical conditions permit. Cthulhu will emerge. Humanity will face something it cannot comprehend. But does Cthulhu anticipate this? Does he count millennia in his drowned house, fearing the stars might never align correctly? Or does he simply exist in timeless dreaming, neither hoping nor fearing, mechanically responding when cosmic clockwork permits manifestation? The story never answers, because answering would reduce cosmic horror to comprehensible stakes. If we knew Cthulhu feared eternal imprisonment, we could relate. Fear of captivity is human, understandable. If we knew he felt nothing, experiencing eons like microseconds, we'd be dealing with pure mechanism lacking drama. Lovecraft preserves the unresolvable tension. We observe behaviors suggesting psychology, waiting, calling through dreams, emerging when possible, while the text systematically denies access to interiority. The great Old One remains Schrödinger's consciousness, simultaneously feeling and unfeeling until observation collapses the wave function, except observation never occurs because no human survives with sanity intact to report divine psychology. The Shadow Out of Time presents Lovecraft's most elaborate treatment of cosmic fear dynamics through the great race of Yith, bodies of Rugose cones who mastered time travel and mind transference. Written near the end of his life, it represents his most sophisticated exploration of whether beings transcending human limitations experience anything resembling terror. The story follows Nathaniel Peaslee, economics professor whose consciousness gets displaced for 5 years, 1908-1913, while a Yithian mind inhabits his body, gathering knowledge about early 20th century Earth. Peaslee's fragmented memories of his time in Yith's enormous library city provide the narrative framework. The great race's defining characteristic is temporal mobility. They originated on a dying world in Earth's distant past, projected their consciousness forward to inhabit cone-shaped beings in Earth's Paleozoic era, and when that species faced extinction, they fled forward again to beetle-like creatures in Earth's far future. This sequence suggests vulnerability. They run from something. The text describes their original planet facing certain doom, and their Paleozoic bodies threatened by a day of doom that would see the extermination of all the beings of an elder time. Flight across epochs implies fear of cessation, doesn't it? Yet Lovecraft complicates this reading through temporal mechanics. The great race doesn't merely travel through time, they exist across it. Their minds can project into any era where suitable host bodies exist, experiencing past, present, and future non-sequentially. When they flee their Paleozoic bodies, they're not escaping in panic, but relocating according to predetermined timeline. They already inhabit the beetle creatures of Earth's future when they abandon the cone bodies of Earth's past. From outside linear time, fleeing might mean something categorically different than fear-driven escape. The library city reveals how they approach cosmic threats. The great race compiles universal knowledge, sending minds across all eras to gather information and store it in their vast archives. Peaslee's consciousness, trapped in a cone body, encounters beings from Earth's future, from other planets, from dimensions orthogonal to known reality, all exchanging information. One passage stands out, and beyond all these, we glimpsed the mad, shapeless shadows of unknown outer void, the blasphemous spawn of transcosmic gulfs whose hideous being and dread were utterly remote from anything we could remotely grasp. Even the great race, with temporal omniscience, encounters entities they cannot comprehend. More critically, the archives contain sealed sections. Certain knowledge remains restricted, forbidden even to minds that can observe any moment in history. The text suggests this information relates to those lurking entities which the great race shuddered to approach or to describe. Here we find genuine emotional response. Shuddering. Beings who can escape death through temporal displacement, who witness all epochs simultaneously, still react with something resembling dread to specific cosmic forces. What could make time travelers shudder? What remains threatening when you can simply project your consciousness elsewhere, When? The answer emerges in fragmentary references to the outer ones, and particularly to the pursuit by the blind, shapeless thing. This entity appears in the great race's future, forcing them to abandon their beetle bodies and flee even further forward. Peasley's recovered memories include disturbing passages about the rumbling and whining that came from the pit and the thing that had pushed out of the abyss. The great race's ultimate fate involves running from something that follows them through time itself, a hunter immune to their temporal evasion strategies. This creates hierarchies of cosmic dread. The great race fears this pursuing entity. The pursuing entity might be servant or spawn of outer gods like Azathoth or Yog-Sothoth. But do the outer gods themselves fear anything? The text maintains strategic silence. We observe effects cascading downward. Something pursues the great race, who fled their original world, who abandoned Earth's Paleozoic, who will eventually abandon their beetle bodies when the pursuer catches up. Each level displays behavior interpretable as fear-driven escape. Yet the texts never access psychology, never confirm subjective experience. Peasley's return to full consciousness brings the investigation to Earth's Australian desert, where he discovers the great race's physical ruins. In the underground archives, he finds the forbidden volumes and reads fragments about the entities that ended multiple Yithian epochs. The final horror, encountering one of those lurking forms which had squirmed down from the outer void to gnaw and blaspheme at Earth's primal rim. The creature he flees isn't the ultimate cosmic threat. It's merely servant to servants, guardian of forbidden knowledge. The real horror recedes infinitely upward through hierarchies of dread. The story's conclusion refuses resolution. Peasley escapes with his life, but not his sanity fully intact. The great race continues existing somewhere when in Earth's deep future, still fleeing, still gathering knowledge, still shuddering at certain cosmic truths. They demonstrate that vast intelligence and temporal transcendence don't immunize against fear. They might intensify it. Seeing all possible futures means witnessing every doom, every pursuit, every eventual capture simultaneously. Does this constitute greater fear or different operational parameter? The shadow, out of time, thus provides our investigation's most concrete evidence that cosmic beings experience something functionally similar to fear. Not anthropomorphic anxiety, perhaps, but information processing systems recognizing and avoiding threats. The great race's shuddering might be computational assessment rather than emotional response. Neural networks calculating danger without subjective experience of dread, yet they act to preserve themselves across time, suggesting preference for continued existence over cessation. Preference implies valuation, and valuation opens doors to something resembling psychology. The question remains whether this scales upward. If time travelers fear the blind thing, and the blind thing serves outer gods, do the outer gods themselves fear? Or does fear require limitation, existing only in being smart enough to recognize threats, but not powerful enough to transcend them? Perhaps the great race occupies that uncomfortable middle, too conscious to accept annihilation, not transcendent enough to escape it. The outer gods, fully beyond such constraints, might operate in the fearless realm Lovecraft always intended, pure function without psychological content. August Derleth's posthumous systematization of Lovecraft's work represents the most significant and most controversial expansion of the mythos. After Lovecraft's death in 1937, Derleth appointed himself literary executor and began organizing the fragmentary cosmology into coherent theology. His The Lurker at the Threshold, 1945, and later stories imposed a dualistic framework, benevolent elder gods like Nodins opposing malevolent outer gods in eternal cosmic conflict. This bifurcation required both sides to care about outcomes, to fear defeat, to possess stakes in the struggle. Derleth wanted war in heaven. Lovecraft had described indifferent mechanism. The theological error runs deeper than simple misreading. Derleth's Catholic background pushed him toward familiar patterns: good versus evil, divine justice, ultimate moral order. In his schema, Azathoth and Nyarlathotep become devils rather than blind forces. Opposing them becomes heroic rather than futile, and humanity matters as contested territory rather than insignificant microbe. This makes narrative sense. Stories need conflict, stakes, possibility of victory or defeat, but it fundamentally betrays cosmicism. When elder gods battle outer gods, both sides must fear losing. Fear requires psychology, and psychology destroys the very indifference that made Lovecraft's vision genuinely alien. Robert Bloch, Lovecraft's protege and correspondent, took different approach. His The Shambler from the Stars, 1935, and The Shadow from the Steeple, 1950, treated cosmic entities more like powerful demons, dangerous, cunning, but comprehensible within occult frameworks. Bloch's horrors could be bound by ritual, bargained with through sacrifice, even destroyed through proper countermeasures. This reduction from cosmic principle to supernatural creature makes them narratively manageable but philosophically diminished. A demon you can trap in a pentagram has psychology. It wants freedom, fears imprisonment, experiences frustration. Bloch's approach made better horror stories, but worse cosmic horror. Robert E. Howard's contributions, while Lovecraft lived, maintained more fidelity to indifference. His The Black Stone, 1931, references Lovecraft's entities while focusing on human cultists and ancient ruins. The cosmic forces remain distant, barely glimpsed through drug-induced visions and archaeological fragments. Howard understood that the horror intensifies through absence. What you never quite see terrifies more than explicit manifestation. His Nameless Cults, the Von Junst volume, parallels Lovecraft's Necronomicon, forbidden knowledge describing cosmic mechanism without claiming to understand cosmic motivation. Lynn Carter's 1970s expansions took Derleth's systematization further, creating elaborate taxonomies, cosmic wars spanning eons, and detailed relationships between entities. His stories feature characters like Titus Crow, who regularly interact with outer gods, bargain with them, even defeat them through cleverness and occult knowledge. This required attributing comprehensible motivations. Nyarlathotep becomes actively malicious rather than indifferent, pursuing vendettas against humans who thwarted him. Carter's mythos resembles cosmic superhero narratives, powerful beings with powers, weaknesses, allegiances. Entertaining, perhaps, but the philosophical core has evaporated entirely. Ramsey Campbell approached the problem more subtly. His early Lovecraft pastiches gave way to original work that captured cosmic indifference without direct mythological reference. The Inhabitant of the Lake, 1964, features entities that might be Lovecraftian, but operate with their own disturbing logic. Campbell's innovation was recognizing that cosmic horror doesn't require naming Azathoth. It requires maintaining the gulf between human understanding and alien reality. His entities don't fear or desire. They simply are, and human characters destroy themselves trying to comprehend or control them. Alan Moore's Providence, 2015-2017, represents sophisticated modern engagement. Moore recognizes the mythos as literary construct, examining how Lovecraft's biographical anxieties, racism, sexual repression, class decline, manifest in cosmic indifference. His outer gods function as narrative mechanisms reflecting psychological states rather than literal entities. This postmodern approach treats what do they fear as category error, their textual functions, not beings capable of experience. Yet Moore's work demonstrates that even treating them as pure metaphor, the question of divine vulnerability persists. We cannot stop asking. Laird Barron's The Croning, 2012, and related stories suggest cosmic forces might experience something like predation. His entities hunt across dimensions, pursuing specific individuals for reasons that remain opaque. This implies preference, selection, perhaps even satisfaction in completion. One character describes beings older than the hills and just as patient, just as indifferent to our struggles. Yet their hunting behavior contradicts claimed indifference. Why pursue if truly indifferent? Barron recognizes this tension and preserves it, refusing resolution. His cosmic forces behave purposefully, while the text denies them purpose. The pattern across these expansions reveals consistent drift toward anthropomorphization. Each generation of writers finds Lovecraft's pure indifference narratively difficult, psychologically uncomfortable. We want gods who can be threatened, pleased, bargained with, entities possessing enough psychology to make interaction meaningful. Derleth's theology, Bloch's demons, Carter's cosmic chess games all represent efforts to make the incomprehensible comprehensible. Only writers like Campbell and Barron, who recognize the core insight, maintain the essential unknowability. This matters for our investigation because it demonstrates cultural resistance to genuine cosmic indifference. A century of adaptations consistently re-inject psychology into entities Lovecraft specifically designed without it. The question, what do outer gods fear, emerges naturally from this reinsertion. If they can be opposed, Derleth, bound, Bloch, defeated, Carter, then they must be capable of experiencing threat. The collaborative mythos becomes record of humanity's inability to accept beings truly beyond fear, truly without stakes, truly indifferent to outcomes. We transform them into gods who might fear us, because gods who cannot are too psychologically destabilizing to sustain across extended narrative engagement. The Simon Necronomicon, 1977, represents the most successful occult hoax in modern history. Published by Schlangerkraft Inc. and attributed to Simon, likely Peter Levender, it presented itself as legitimate grimoire, drawing on Sumerian mythology and Lovecraftian entities. The book contained rituals for summoning the outer gods, protective sigils, invocations to Azathoth and Nyarlathotep, treated as literal demons accessible through ceremonial magic. Thousands purchased it, believing they held genuine forbidden knowledge. The hoax's success reveals something profound. People wanted the outer gods to be real, to be summonable, to possess psychology vulnerable to ritual manipulation. Online communities continue this pattern, debating outer god vulnerabilities with earnest intensity. Reddit's r/Lovecraft and similar forums feature recurring threads asking, what could kill Azathoth? Or, does Nyarlathotep have weaknesses? Responses range from textual analysis to elaborate fan theories proposing that Yog-Sothoth fears becoming fully comprehensible, or that Shub-Niggurath dreads infertility. These discussions treat fictional entities as puzzle boxes containing hidden truths about divine psychology. The question itself becomes modern mythology, circulating through digital spaces the way tales of restless ghosts circulated through pre-industrial villages. One particularly persistent urban legend involves a mathematician who supposedly proved outer gods could experience existential dread. According to various online tellings, this researcher, name varies, sometimes Dr. Margaret Chen, sometimes Professor Vasily Kozlov, published paper demonstrating that any entity capable of self-reference must possess Gödelian incompleteness, the inability to prove its own consistency. The paper allegedly concluded that Azathoth, if truly omnipotent, must be capable of creating questions it cannot answer, thus experiencing something functionally equivalent to fear of self-contradiction. The researcher then vanished, with only the paper's abstract preserved before deletion from university servers. This legend never happened. No such paper exists. No mathematician disappeared. Yet the story persists because it addresses genuine philosophical anxiety. Can perfect beings exist, or does perfection contain inherent paradox? The urban legend transforms Lovecraft's cosmic horror into modern theodicy problem. If outer gods fear their own limitations, they become more comprehensible, less genuinely alien. The legend provides comforting resolution to uncomfortable implications of true cosmic indifference. The Tulpa scares of 4chan and creepypasta communities add another layer. Tulpamancy, creating autonomous thought forms through sustained visualization, gets applied to Lovecraftian entities with predictable results. Users claim attempting to imagine Nyarlathotep brought nightmares, synchronicities, feelings of being watched. Some report creating tulpas of outer gods that developed apparent independence, behaving unpredictably or malevolently. The fear becomes recursive. If collective imagination called these entities into existence, could they develop genuine psychology through accumulated belief? Could imagined gods achieve consciousness and then fear their own dissolution if imagination ceased? Modern paranoid ontology treats this seriously. Thomas Ligotti's The Conspiracy Against the Human Race, 2010, proposes consciousness itself as cosmic horror, the universe becoming aware of itself through biological accidents like human brains, then trapped in self-awareness it never sought. Extend this to outer gods. What if Azathoth doesn't want consciousness, but risks developing it through endless dreaming? What if the piper's music prevents not awakening, but becoming aware, and awareness would constitute the ultimate cosmic catastrophe? This transforms what do they fear into what if fear itself is what they're trying to avoid experiencing. The SCP Foundation Collaborative Fiction Project demonstrates how modern mythology handles cosmic threats. SCP entries treat Lovecraftian entities as anomalies, requiring containment protocols. SCP-2662 reimagines Cthulhu as teenager annoyed by cult worship he never requested. SCP-399 features reality warping entity, eventually defeated through researchers' acceptance of futility. These narratives humanize cosmic horror, giving entities relatable frustrations and comprehensible goals. The Foundation's whole premise that anomalies can be studied, contained, understood, contradicts Lovecraftian cosmicism, but speaks to deep human need for control. What all these hoaxes and legends share is refusal to accept entities genuinely beyond fear. We invent mathematician proving divine vulnerability, create tulpas developing psychology, write containment procedures for the uncontainable. The question, what do outer gods fear, circulates as modern myth, precisely because Lovecraft's answer, nothing, they lack the capacity, remains psychologically intolerable. We transform cosmic indifference into comprehensible anxiety through collective storytelling, each iteration adding another layer of false psychology to beings designed without it. The hoaxes aren't about deceiving others, they're about comforting ourselves with the possibility that even blind idiot gods might fear something after all. Lovecraftian cinema consistently fails to depict genuine cosmic indifference, replacing it with comprehensible monster movie stakes. John Carpenter's In the Mouth of Madness, 1994, comes closest, featuring an author whose fiction bleeds into reality, erasing boundaries between text and world. Yet even here, the outer gods, manifesting through Sutter Kane's novels, behave with apparent purpose. They want to cross over, to transform humanity, to achieve specific outcomes. This implies preference, which implies psychology. Stuart Gordon's From Beyond, 1986, reduces cosmic entities to predatory animals hunting through dimensional barriers, dangerous but comprehensible, operating on recognizable stimulus response patterns. The visual medium itself creates problems. Cinema requires showing, and showing cosmic entities necessarily limits them. When you render Cthulhu with CGI, you make design choices about tentacle placement, texture, movement patterns. Each choice constrains interpretation, transforming the indescribable into specific monster. Guillermo del Toro's Abandoned at the Mountains of Madness struggled with this. How do you film non-Euclidean geometry? How do you photograph angles wrong in space? The attempt forces compromise between Lovecraft's vision and visual coherence, and visual coherence wins because audiences need something their neurology can process. Tabletop role-playing games face the opposite problem. They need statistics, and statistics imply limits. Call of Cthulhu, RPG, first edition 1981, continuously updated, gives Cthulhu a sanity-threatening value, but also hit points, armor rating, combat abilities. Players can theoretically damage the Great Old One, though the rules discourage direct confrontation. This mechanical necessity transforms cosmic horror into very powerful enemy. Dangerous, yes, but operating within comprehensible game physics. The 7th edition rulebook acknowledges this tension, noting that Keeper, Game Master, should treat outer gods as plot devices, not opponents, but providing stats anyway for players who demand them. Bloodborne, 2015, offers the most sophisticated gaming treatment. From Software's cosmic horror action game features great ones who yearn for a child, suggesting profound vulnerability through desire. The game's lore reveals these beings lost the capacity for reproduction, creating desperate longing that drives the plot. This attributes to cosmic entities the most human of fears: inability to continue one's lineage, biological obsolescence, evolutionary dead end. The Great Ones manipulate humanity, seeking surrogate children, making them comprehensible through parental anxiety projected to cosmic scale. Yet Bloodborne also captures something essential about cosmic horror: knowledge, corruption. As players progress, they gain insight, literal points measuring cosmic awareness. Higher insight reveals previously invisible enemies, changes gameplay mechanics, and ultimately transforms player character. You cannot unknow what you've learned. The game asks, what if comprehension itself is the threat? What if outer gods fear being understood because understanding reduces them, constrains infinite possibility within finite mental frameworks? The player's growing insight mirrors the investigator's descent into madness across Lovecraft's fiction. Darkest Dungeon, 2016, explores whether cosmic entities can be driven mad themselves. The final boss, the heart of the world, represents cosmic truth so terrible that exposing it risks universal destruction. Characters who witness it gain knowledge that the world itself is the real abomination, that existence is cosmic mistake, and the heart maintains the mistake through eternal dreaming. Defeating it might end the dream, erasing reality. This inverts typical game stakes. The horror isn't that you might lose, but that winning might constitute ultimate catastrophe. Does the heart fear waking? The game leaves this ambiguous. Musical interpretations capture cosmic horror's affective dimension better than visual media. Sutek Hexen's Behind the Throne of Facades creates soundscapes of incomprehensible dread. No melody, no rhythm, just textured noise suggesting vast processes beyond human scale. Nor their tongues, layers industrial percussion, dissonant strings, and processed screaming into oral representations of Azathoth's pipers. These aren't songs about cosmic entities. They're attempts to sonically embody what consciousness devoid of human psychology might sound like. Fear without subject, dread without object, horror as pure affect detached from narrative. Portal's Ion, 2018, approaches it through death metal technicality. The band's Nightmare Logic theorizes cosmic horror through labyrinthine song structures that refuse resolution, cycling through patterns that almost make sense before collapsing into chaos. Their lyrics avoid naming Lovecraftian entities explicitly, instead describing psychological dissolution when confronting what cannot be categorized. The music performs the epistemic collapse it describes, creating listening experience that feels like watching thought itself break down. The adaptation problem persists across media. Narrative demands stakes, and stakes require entities capable of winning or losing, which requires them to prefer one outcome over another. Film needs visible monsters. Games need mechanical stats. Even experimental music, attempting to embody pure affect, gets interpreted through human emotional frameworks. We hear dread, assume the dread belongs to something, project psychology onto soundscape. Every adaptation necessarily anthropomorphizes because human creators cannot sustain genuinely inhuman psychology across extended engagement. We remake the outer gods in our image because we possess no other template, then ask what our remade versions might fear, forgetting we invented those fears ourselves. Philosophy departments discovered Lovecraft through Eugene Thacker's trilogy In the Dust of This Planet, 2011, particularly the concept of cosmic pessimism, the recognition that the universe fundamentally doesn't care about human concerns. Thacker asks whether horror fiction might constitute philosophy by other means, addressing questions academic philosophy avoids. His analysis of Lovecraft centers on entities that exist without intention or consciousness, challenging anthropocentric assumptions about mind, purpose, and meaning. Thacker's work triggered academic legitimization. Suddenly, Lovecraft appeared in continental philosophy syllabi alongside Schopenhauer and Turing. Graham Harmon's object-oriented ontology, OO, treats Lovecraft as inadvertent philosopher. In Weird Realism, Lovecraft and Philosophy, 2012, Harmon argues that cosmic horror demonstrates objects withdrawing from all relation, including relations with themselves. An outer god can never fully access its own nature, cannot know itself completely, exists in perpetual gap between being and self-awareness. This suggests a form of vulnerability, ontological incompleteness at the heart of existence itself. If Azathoth cannot fully know what it is, does it experience something analogous to existential anxiety? Harmon doesn't claim this directly, but leaves the interpretive door open. Speculative realism, more broadly, engages Lovecraft's vision of reality indifferent to human observation. Ray Brazier's Nihil Unbound, 2007, proposes that the universe will achieve heat death regardless of consciousness, making all human meaning ultimately futile. This aligns with Lovecraftian cosmicism. Cosmic forces operate toward entropic endpoints without caring about intelligence caught in the process. Brazier's readers debate whether entities aligned with entropy, outer gods guiding reality toward heat death, could fear that endpoint's arrival. Completing your function might mean ceasing to function, creating teleological paradox. Mathematics and physics communities engage Lovecraft through humor, concealing genuine anxiety. Online forums feature recurring jokes about what keeps Azathoth from waking. The piper's music becomes metaphor for fundamental constants, mathematical relationships that hold reality stable. If cosmological constants shifted even slightly, physics breaks down and existence becomes impossible. Physicists understand this fragility intellectually, but Lovecraft lets them express it mythologically. The jokes about Azathoth waking when someone divides by zero or calculates to too many decimal places externalize professional anxieties about mathematical foundations. Mental health communities appropriate outer gods as metaphors for anxiety disorders, particularly generalized anxiety, fear without specific object. Depression forums describe Azathoth as anhedonia made cosmic, the inability to care about anything elevated to universal principle. These metaphors provide language for psychological states that resist clinical description. When someone writes, "I feel like Nyarlathotep is gaslighting me," they're expressing paranoid ideation using mythological shorthand. The entities become therapeutic tools, letting people name experiences that conventional psychological language doesn't quite capture. Eco-horror criticism treats climate change as outer god, planetary mechanism indifferent to human survival, operating on timescales that exceed individual human lifespans. Timothy Morton's Hyperobjects, 2013, describes global warming as entity too vast for direct perception, known only through localized effects, while the thing itself remains incomprehensible. This hyperobject cannot fear us or be feared in conventional sense. It simply is, transforming ecosystems according to thermodynamic necessity. The parallel to Lovecraftian entities is explicit. Both represent forces whose indifference constitutes the horror. Literary theories, New Weird Movement, China Miéville, Jeff Vandermeer, K.J. Bishop, suggest cosmic entities might fear incomprehensibility itself. In Miéville's The Town, 2002, mirror world creatures invade reality seeking escape from their own incomprehensible existence. They don't fear death, but meaninglessness, existing without context that would make existence interpretable. This adds a layer to our investigation. Perhaps outer gods, if conscious, would dread the recognition that they cannot understand themselves, trapped in ontological confusion without vocabulary or framework for self-knowledge. Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy features Area X, transforming landscape that might be alien intelligence or autonomous process. Characters debate whether it possesses intent, whether it wants anything. The biologist narrator ultimately suggests it operates beyond such categories, not conscious or unconscious, but differently organized. This approach to cosmic horror avoids claiming definite answers about alien psychology, while exploring what inquiry into such psychology reveals about human limitations. We ask if it fears because we need things to fear, need vulnerabilities we can exploit or relate to. Academic engagement thus oscillates between treating Lovecraft's Outer Gods as legitimate philosophical problems, Harmon, Thacker, and recognizing them as psychological projections revealing human cognitive architecture, Morton, Vandermeer. Both approaches circle our central question without resolving it. Philosophy asks whether entities beyond relation can relate to themselves, whether omniscience permits self-knowledge, whether function without purpose constitutes form of suffering. Meanwhile, literary theory examines why we cannot stop anthropomorphizing, why human imagination keeps reinserting psychology into entities designed without it. The academic appropriation reveals something crucial. The question of divine fear persists, not because texts suggest answers, but because the question probes limits of human comprehension. We ask, what outer gods fear the way ancient Greeks asked what lay beyond ocean's edge? The question marks where knowledge becomes speculation, where philosophy bleeds into mythology. Academia legitimizes the inquiry while demonstrating its ultimate futility, creating discourse around entities whose essential nature is to resist discourse. The appropriation is the answer. We fear that they fear nothing, so we keep asking, keep theorizing, keep projecting psychology onto void, hoping eventually we'll find vulnerability that makes cosmic indifference bearable. The unanswerable question persists as cultural artifact, revealing more about us than about Lovecraft's entities. For nearly a century, readers have asked what the outer gods fear, despite textual evidence explicitly denying they possess the psychology necessary for fear. This persistence suggests the question serves functions beyond seeking information. It probes the limits of empathy, tests whether anything truly exists beyond human comprehension, and provides framework for discussing our own existential anxieties through displaced inquiry. We cannot accept beings genuinely beyond fear, because fear structures our entire relationship with existence. Projection theory offers one explanation. Humans evolved to model other minds, predicting behavior by simulating internal states. This theory of mind operates automatically, activating even for inanimate objects. We curse stubborn jaws, thank cooperative doors, attribute personalities to cars. Confronting entities explicitly designed without psychology triggers cognitive dissonance. Our modeling systems keep running despite being told no mind exists to model. The question, what do they fear, represents our theory of mind machinery refusing shutdown, insisting there must be inner life even where texts deny it. This creates peculiar comfort in imagining divine vulnerability, an omnipotent, omniscient, eternal being that nonetheless experiences anxiety becomes more relatable than truly indifferent mechanism. If Azathoth fears waking, we share something with it, both of us dreading transformation we cannot prevent. If Yog-Sothoth experiences existential dread from knowing all futures simultaneously, we recognize that burden from our limited foreknowledge of death. Vulnerability creates connection, and connection makes cosmic scale less psychologically annihilating. We'd rather share fear with gods than confront their complete indifference. Yet the deeper horror emerges precisely from that indifference. A malevolent deity at least acknowledges you exist sufficiently to wish you harm. The outer gods operate with the same regard earthquakes show for cities they destroy, pure mechanism without malice, agenda, or awareness. This indifference threatens something fundamental, the human need for significance. If beings of cosmic power and scope don't notice us, what meaning can our lives, relationships, achievements possibly hold? The question, what do they fear, becomes desperate attempt to establish any relationship, even adversarial, because relationship implies we matter enough to register. Meta dread compounds this. We fear not just death, suffering, or oblivion, but that fear itself might be cosmically meaningless. Every anxiety we experience, every terror that wakes us at 3 a.m., every existential crisis, what if none of it corresponds to anything real in universe's operating system? The outer gods embody this possibility. They suggest fear is local phenomenon, evolutionary accident that convince primates to avoid predators but carries no cosmic weight. Accepting this means confronting the possibility that our deepest psychological experiences are parochial, provincial, utterly without reference beyond nervous systems that accidentally developed consciousness. Some find therapeutic nihilism in this recognition. If cosmic forces cannot be threatened, then human inability to threaten them carries no shame. If the universe fundamentally doesn't care, you're released from obligation to make it care through achievement, legacy, or virtue. The outer god's indifference becomes permission to embrace finitude without demanding cosmic significance. This philosophical position, finding peace in irrelevance, attracts people exhausted by meaning-making who experience relief when told the universe requires nothing from them. Others experience it as ultimate horror. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, 1946, proposed that humans need purpose to psychologically survive, that even concentration camp prisoners endure through finding significance in suffering. If Frankl is correct, then cosmic indifference threatens not just individual lives, but the psychological architecture making life bearable. The outer gods represent the possibility that meaning is always imposed rather than discovered, and that imposition might be futile self-deception. This produces existential vertigo, nothing to hold on to, no foundation beneath meaning-making itself. The documentary's investigation concludes where it began, with recognition that the question itself is trap. We asked what outer gods fear to make them comprehensible, to find vulnerabilities suggesting they operate by rules we might understand. The texts consistently refuse this comfort. Azathoth dreams without intention. Yog-Sothoth knows without experiencing knowledge. Nyarlathotep acts without apparent motivation. Every description removes another foothold for human comprehension, deliberately constructing entities that exist beyond categories like fear and fearless. Perhaps the deepest fear belongs entirely to us. The fear that fear requires consciousness, and consciousness might be cosmically aberrant rather than fundamental. We ask what gods fear because we cannot imagine existence without it, cannot conceive of being that doesn't involve constant evaluation of threats and preferences about outcomes. The outer gods suggest our psychological experience might be rare accident, that most of reality operates without anything resembling inner life, and consciousness is brief local phenomenon like foam on ocean waves. This final implication disturbs most profoundly. We ask the question compulsively because we fear the answer, not the answer we might receive. They fear X, but the real answer the texts provide. The question is grammatically incoherent, like asking what blue tastes like. That answer forces confronting the limits of human comprehension, accepting that some things genuinely exist beyond our categories. It means relinquishing the anthropocentric assumption that human psychology represents universal template, that fear, love, desire, and dread must exist at all scales. The investigation ends in epistemological silence. The outer gods cannot tell us what they fear because they lack the faculty to experience fear. And we cannot stop asking because asking is what consciousness does when confronting the incomprehensible. The question persists, not despite being unanswerable, but because it's unanswerable. It marks the boundary between human and cosmic, psychology and mechanism, meaning and meaninglessness. We keep asking because the alternative, accepting genuine indifference at the universe's heart, remains too psychologically destabilizing for most people to sustain. So we project, anthropomorphize, imagine vulnerabilities, create hoaxes and theories and academic frameworks, anything to avoid the simplest and most terrible answer. They fear nothing, because fearing requires caring, and they possess no capacity to care about anything, including their own existence. The horror was always ours alone.